heard you should share what you know plenty of times throughout my life. What I know is this. I've been playing hockey for almost 13 years now. I've spent countless hours both on and off the ice with my teammates, working to be the best we can be. We've won 8 state titles and 4 bronze national titles. Yet when I tell people that I play hockey, it always goes to the fact that I am a female hockey player. My gender has nothing to do with my accomplishments. I know hockey, and I know that there are plenty of examples of faulty representation and interesting word choice. So I decided to focus in and try and understand why I am the female hockey player and not just the hockey player. It's true that in the hockey world there have been many successes in creating a true equal game, yet those successes are lessened by how they choose their words. It's a common misconception that women's sports don't garner as much attention as male sports because of the skill of the players is lesser. In a survey conducted by YouGov in June 2021, 40% of global consumers cite the lack of coverage of women's sports as the reason they don't engage, while 35% cite the lack of marketing given to women's games. Only 14% of global consumers surveyed cited that the reason they don't watch women's sports was the slower play. This is just one example of the many obstacles that female athletes in male-dominated sports face. I could also talk about pay disparity between men's and women's sports, or a lack of resources such as proper equipment and fields to play on. Or I could talk about the lack of funds going into women's sports at all levels. Remember that. But I want to focus on the root of these problems. Why is it that women athletes face such a stigma in their daily lives? It comes down to a lack of true representation. An equal number of men and women in the sport, rather than putting the spotlight on one woman and calling it representation. And one other thing, something that you may not think about, the word choice used to refer to these athletes. In March of this year, I attended the Red Wings Hockey is for Everyone Women's History Month, or Women's History Night in honor of Women's History Month. The goal of this event was to highlight the achievements of women, past and present, in their organization. They honored what they called game changers, women that they saw making a difference in youth education, wellness, and sports participation. All around, the Red Wings had truly good intentions with this event, yet one of their big fundraisers was this shirt. Powerful, confident, okay, yeah. Authentic, independent, sure. I want to focus in on that middle one, compassionate. That word doesn't typically describe male hockey players, so why is it a moniker given to female players? Word choice is the first problem when it comes down to it. How does the media refer to women in different sports? And should being a woman even be a part of the conversation? Gender marking is the term used to describe women's sports as the standard, or as men's sport as the standard, and women's sports as inferior to the male sports world. For example, the women's NCAA Division I tournament for basketball is referred to as the Women's Final Four, whereas the men's tournament is just the Final Four. This qualification to the women's game implies that it is inherently different in some way from the men's game. It was found that gender marking occurred on average of 27.5 times in women's sporting events, but none in men's sporting events. And that sports commentators often participate in gender marking for women's events, but not for men's events. Some instances of gender marking can have an easier fix, such as giving the different tournaments different names. But when gender marking is used to qualify the sport as a whole, it boils down to how women athletes are viewed by society. Word choice can have a huge impact on the perception of female athletes. In a study done by Cambridge University, it found that when men appear in the media, it is along with monikers such as strong, fastest, win, and dominate, while women appear along with words such as pregnant, married, and defeat. Cambridge University analyzed the word choice used by different media outlets during and after the 2016 Olympics. They used a collection of written texts regarding the event, what they called corpus, and discovered an interesting imbalance. In past Olympics, the use of the word sportsman was the dominating word when referring to athletes. In an attempt to correct this, Olympic reporting emphasized the use of sportswoman and unintentionally contributed to a huge increase in the use of the word and the subsequent increase in gender marking. There is an overcompensation at the hands of the media that, while well-intended, is doing more harm than good when athletes are boxed in by gender. Cambridge University also found that in Olympic reporting there was heavy emphasis on aesthetic rather than athleticism, with women being presented with words such as clad and dress. The study also found that women are more likely to be presented with the verb wear, whereas this is never the case for men. Same can be said with words such as married and unmarried and anything that has to do with their age. In the article, When We See Her, What Do We See? Gender Norms in Hockey Photography, written by Courtney Sitzo and Brett Party, they brought to light an interesting occurrence when you Google male hockey players compared to when you Google female hockey players. They noticed when looking up female players in the sport that there is a surplus in the amount of interview and modeling type shots rather than actual action shots of them in the game. They conducted a study. They took the first 5 rows that come up when you Google a hockey player's name and took the ratio of action shots to model shots. For Hillary Knight, a power forward on the USA Olympic team, out of the 27 photos in the first 5 rows, only 1 was of her actually playing. They compared that to other athletes such as Sidney Crosby, who centers for the Pittsburgh Penguins. In his first 5 rows, he was playing in 22 out of the 28 photos. This shocking contrast comes down to 2 things: the lack of coverage of female sports and the emphasis, again, on aesthetic over athleticism. There have been many strides in inclusivity in hockey over the last couple of years. For example, last year, the first NHL broadcaster, Leah Hexall, was introduced. Katie Bly also made her appearance as the first female referee at the American Hockey League or semi-pro level. History coming on this opening puck drop is what the sportscaster said when Katie Bly became the first female ref to ref an AHL game in October of last year. The sportscaster then proceeded to say that she is one of 10 women hired by the American Hockey League as either linespeople or referees. As of 2022, there are 10 female refs and 237 male refs in the AHL. This progress is instrumental in the push for equality in the sport, but when there's fanfare for every woman that has hit a high level, and as much as it should be celebrated, it comes off as disingenuous. Sportscasters and newspapers make headlines that make a point to examine that she is the first woman, that she is breaking barriers as a woman, or a woman getting a chance. It undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is not normal. This loud, overbearing, in-your-face style is not what representation should be. It shouldn't be a single woman in front of a camera filling some quota for leaders of these organizations to pat themselves on the back, tell themselves they did such a good job making their sport unbiased. Representation should be quiet and natural. It should be hiring women and men at an equal rate, showing their skills equally, giving them the same amount of screen time. Representation shouldn't need to be pointed out. It doesn't help that when these athletes are interviewed, the questions are centered around their gender. Going back to Katie Bly, when she was interviewed shortly after her reffing debut by the NHL Network, one question she was asked was, were you hearing it from players on either sides? Were they respectful? Not only does this put the players in a bad light and assume that they wouldn't be respectful, it shows that the hockey world is aware of the mistreatment towards athletes of the other gender. It is creating unneeded controversy on the ice while also undermining wise performance as a ref. Praise and headlines should come from being good at what you do, rather than by being a woman. I took some recent headlines in women's hockey to see how they compare to the ones being used in men's hockey. In women's hockey, it's women referees getting a chance in AHL. The word choice says that this is a chance, implying that this is a chance that can be blown for female refs. And to top that, the headline doesn't even mention the names of the refs coming to the AHL. In men's hockey, it's referee Justin Key makes NHL debut. The wording is different. It's debut rather than chance. They mention his name. What may seem like a small issue can have a huge impact when it comes to how female hockey players are viewed in comparison to men's hockey players. There have been some steps towards true representation, seemingly simple things such as equal amount of female and male athletes being showcased in Bauer's newer commercials, or the increased use of gender-neutral terms such as sportsperson or linesperson is already showing that when there's a conscious effort to have representation and to choose words carefully, it creates a more inclusive place for all athletes. You may think, does this really matter? Yes, it does. Let's go back to what I mentioned earlier. Word choice and representation both contribute to how society views athletes of all genders. For women, this results in pay disparity and the lack of resources and funds. This is a systemic issue and can only be solved by the conscious action of every individual. That means you. Recognize things such as gender marking or unequal representation. Recognize words used in headings, interviews, and online, and ask yourself, can this be said about all genders? Words and representation are behind all great change, all great shifts in thinking. Recognize when you see it, recognize when you do it. Thank you.